All right, a little Friday night video. Hopefully, everyone's doing well out there. A couple things to talk about. Certainly, Kyrie, and we're going to talk about hardship exception. I think we've talked about that at length, but with the recent news by Woj and Baxter Holmes, I figured we'd kind of go in a little bit of a deep dive and make it clarify for everyone as far as what the proposed new rules and what impact it has on teams here. First with Kyrie. When I put out that article earlier in the week, when we kind of look at each of the front office discussions, the section for Brooklyn was, when do we get to a point with Kyrie to use him as a part-time player? Um, and that was geared towards more after the trade deadline. As far as, I didn't think there was a Kyrie trade coming down the pike. It was more of, when we get past February 10th, when do we start to integrate him, even if it's just a part-time player? And as you saw with the news today, the Nets have started that process already for Irving to play in away games. He cannot play in Toronto. I think there's a March 1st game, and he cannot play when the Nets play at the Knicks at the Garden. So those are two away games that he is not going to be allowed to play in. I totally get it where Brooklyn's coming from. I've seen people say that the Nets caved in. Listen, you have a lot of workload on Kevin Durant, Patty Mills, the group of eight that has been out there. Certainly James Harden. If you can get Kyrie for away games, and he is totally bought in, it's better than any trade that you can make. Especially with Joe Harris out. Also, I thought when you watch this Brooklyn team, they have a hard time getting to the rim. A lot of the shots are a lot of mid-range, certainly a lot of threes, but they just have a hard time getting to the rim, and certainly Kyrie can do that. So I totally get it. I understand it from the Nets. We'll see if he'll be on the West Coast trip. They're in Portland. Certainly that Christmas Day, it would be great on ESPN. You get a KD, Kyrie versus LeBron, AD, and Westbrook. That would be tremendous, but I mean, the Nets are 21-8. They're sitting in first place. They've been decimated like a lot of teams. They've beaten Toronto and Philly this week, two probably as good of a wins that you are going to get. So I understand it that from a Nets perspective, from the players, front office, ownership, Kyrie, everyone's on the same page as far as what's going to happen. I think the big thing is what happens when we get closer to mid-April, May. Do the rules in New York kind of change a little bit here when the weather gets warmer? I don't see it changing even with a new mayor here. So that's my take on Kyrie. So the hardship exception here that Baxter and Woj reported earlier here, a little bit about the hardship exception. So basically the rule is that if you have, once you hit 4 players that have been out 3 games and are going to be out an extended period of time, then you can add a player. So if you have 3 players, a 4th player is out for an extended period of time, you can add a player to a 10-day contract before the 10-day period starts on January 5th. The league 2 years ago tweaked that rule. So when you got to that 4th player, and that player was in the health and safety protocol, so tested positive for COVID or was exposed, there was no waiting period. There was no 3-game waiting period. The player wasn't going to have to be out 2 weeks. Once that player, that 4th player, got in the protocol, then you can add a player. Once you got another player, you can continually add on here. We saw that with, certainly with Brooklyn, with Langston Galloway, the Nuggets, Devon Reed. Teams were adding that. The big question that teams had, and I tweeted about it earlier, is that, like, wait a minute. All right, we're decimated with injuries. Why do we have to pay a luxury tax penalty? If you're Nets, Langston Galloway would have cost them $500,000. If you're a team like Miami that's right under the luxury tax, if they had gotten decimated with COVID, why do we have to go into the luxury tax because of it? It's not a controllable thing here. So what the league has done now is that when you get to that 4th player, right? You still got to get to that 4th player, and that player tests positive for COVID. You are permitted to sign a player to the hardship exception. when you get to a 5th player, a 6th player, and a 7th player, it is mandatory here. So what the league is doing is that they are saying, we don't want games canceled, right? We want teams to be somewhat intact. We are going to be mandating once you get to a 5th, 6th, and 7th. 4th player is permitted. 5, 6, 7 is mandated because how the rules were, it was basically left up at the discretion of the team. So if you were a team like, let's say, Chicago, for example, you could say, you know what, we're not going to sign anyone. Suspend the game. Well, now the league is saying, okay, if you have a 5th player who's out, a 6th player who's out, or a 7th player out, now it is mandatory to fill that spot, where beforehand it was not. Here's the other thing. When we talked about the financial angle, if you sign a player to the hardship exception related to COVID, okay, that does not count towards team salary or the luxury tax. So for Brooklyn, Langston Galloway, James Ennis, Shaquille Harrison, players like that do not count towards the luxury tax. In the Lakers, Isaiah Thomas does not count. That salary does not. You still got to pay that player, but it doesn't count towards the luxury tax. So that is a little bit about the hardship exception. My wife is calling me. I see it coming up here. The rules are basically the same, but now you are mandated as far as when you get to that number that you have to sign a player, and that wasn't the case. You're mandated, but it doesn't count toward the luxury tax or team salary. So hopefully everyone has a great Friday night. There's a bunch of games here. I'm in a sweatshirt type mood. I've already ordered Domino's, had some wings. I tell you what, Domino's Pizza's changed, and it's pretty good. I don't have a sponsorship agreement there. And I'm heading out to Vegas on Sunday, G League, or as I should say, the Hardship Exception Classic. I think that a lot of teams are going to be looking at players for those hardship spots if they need it.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.